Hello, my name is Jeff Farbman from the Wallace Center at WINROCK International. Welcome to this National Good Food Network webinar entitled Community Food, Return to Roots. Thank you for joining us today. This is the third webinar of a series of 4 that has emerged out of our work for the Kellogg Foundation on promising innovations that community food organizations are using to create equity, health, environmental stewardship, and vitality in the areas. Susan will talk more about the project, but today we get to learn about 2 initiatives that truly understand the power of healthy food to connect us to our land, our culture, and our heritage. Here's our program outline, our agenda for today. You will see this redisplayed as we make our way through the webinar, but right now it's my job to welcome you all. So here I go. Welcome to the webinar. The Wallace Center is a business unit of WINROCK International and is the host of the National Good Food Network webinars. The Wallace Center has been a leading organization in the movement for a more sustainable and equitable food system for over 30 years. We are focused on advancing regional, collaborative efforts around the country to increase the amount of good food, healthy, green, fair, affordable food available to more eaters in all communities. The National Good Food Network, or NGFN, is an initiative of the Wallace Center that accelerates progress towards the Wallace Center's vision. The NGFN is a connector. We connect peer-to-peer, peer-to-expert, businesses and support organizations to best practices and lessons learned, projects to funding, and all of this is at a national scale so that innovations spread rapidly throughout the good food world. You can learn more about the great work of the Wallace Center at wallacecenter.org and about the National Good Food Network at ngfn.org, where you can dig into our great resources to help your work, including, as I mentioned, our large collection of archived webinars. So now let me bring on my colleague, Susan Lightfoot-Schempf, a program officer here at Wallace Center, whose portfolio includes our work with community-based food systems. Susan?
All right, thanks, Jeff. And hey, everybody, thanks so much for joining us today as we continue to explore inspiring community-based food systems innovations through this community food webinar series. Today, we'll be hearing from 2 really incredible organizations and community initiatives that are building food sovereignty by returning to the roots, including the American Friends Service Committee of New Mexico and the Klamath Basin Tribal Food Security Project. This webinar series is part of a newer area of work for the Wallace Center and community-based food systems. And I have the great privilege of leading this work and working to support community-based organizations across the U.S. that are using food systems as a medium for community transformation. And we do very Wallace Center activities in facilitating capacity building and peer-to-peer learning. Providing opportunities for technical assistance and training, and doing our best to document and share our learnings out with the network through different strategies like this webinar series, with the overall goal of helping to build the capacity of community-based organizations and scaling up the impact of our collective food systems work. This picture right here is a good example of the kind of stuff that we do in community-based food systems. Just a couple weeks ago, we were up in Detroit where we were hosting a food systems leadership intensive with 25 emerging and existing leaders from across the country who are working on food systems change in their communities. And we had fantastic hosts at D-Town Farm by Malik Yakini and Karanji Kaduma of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. Just had amazing discussions and peer-to-peer connections, and those are the kinds of things that we do with the Wallace Center. We have an exciting new initiative that I want to tell you all about before we dive into the content today. I want to provide you with a quick snapshot. Next month, we'll be launching a new food systems leadership network that it will be a national community of practice to support community-based organizations focusing in on leadership development, sharing promising and cutting-edge program strategies, and building organizational business capacity. We'll have a number of resources available at no cost for participants, and we'll be sending out invitations in the next couple weeks. So if you're not already on the NGFN newsletter, please sign up today and stay informed as we roll this out. The Food System Leadership Network is actually an outgrowth of a research project conducted by the Wallace Center and commissioned by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, where we scanned the country to uncover new and lesser known community-based organizations and projects. And we were looking to identify kind of emerging trends and innovation, and our goal is to bring attention to the truly amazing work that is happening in communities across the country in the community-based food movement, and also get a better sense of the kind of work that's happening, and where the commonalities are, and also where some of the challenges are. And we saw that there's a wide range of programs and approaches, but really a common commitment to a set of values amongst this movement, including a really strong focus on equity and social justice, democratic community ownership and connection, and community building, and really creating access to healthy and sustainably grown food for all members of the community. And I think that all the listeners out there can probably resonate with these values and recognize them at play in your own communities. Through this research, we identified 8 themes in innovation. And they're pictured here, and really central to all are a systems approach, which aims for multiple points of impact. And I think really everyone is aiming to get its systems change. And I think you'll see that embodied in our guest speakers today. Today we'll be digging into the Return to Roots theme, but I just wanted to encourage you all to check out the community food website set out by the Kellogg Foundation, which features the report by the Wallace Center, as well as a parallel report that was produced by the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative over at the University of Arkansas, which has some amazing and inspiring examples in it as well, and really aligns with the theme of our conversation today. And there's also some great content there on that community food website to check out. You can also access the NGFN webinar archives to check out the 2 previous webinars that we did on this research. So one of the most striking findings in our research is that innovation is not always new. It doesn't mean new, and I personally find that to be pretty refreshing. A growing number of communities and organizations are embracing food sovereignty as their guiding framework, and are taking their food and agriculture systems into their own hands to ensure that all people in their communities have the right to healthy, culturally appropriate, and sustainably produced food. These approaches mark a very clear departure from the conventional ag system in the US, and people are working hard to regenerate traditional foodways. We're seeing some really creative interpretations of older practices and approaches that use food to heal and connect and empower communities. Projects like the Salt Lake City Fruit Share project that's pictured on the right, as well as La Cocina in San Francisco that supports low-income women of color as they launch food enterprises. There are a number, there's actually 11 featured projects in this part of the report. Incredible diversity of organizations from coast to coast and border to border. And I wish we could hear from all of them today, but I want to encourage you to get on that website and check out the report and read about the amazing work that we're doing. But I'm delighted that we get to hear today from one of them, the American Friends Service Committee in New Mexico, and their director, Saida Namaste. Since 1976, the American Friends Service Committee of New Mexico has identified with the struggles of local people to empower themselves, with particular attention to water and land use and the need to support traditional ways of life. AFSC New Mexico works to create systemic change in the food system to support small farmers and increase access to healthy local food in the community, including local schools and daycare centers. They create economic viability through the training of small farmers in sustainable agricultural practices, thereby protecting land and water rights and traditional cultural practices. Saida Namaste is the director of the American Friends Service Committee in New Mexico program. In her 10 years there, she has helped create 3 farmer cooperatives, connected 6 school districts with local food, and managed 11 farmer training programs across the state. Saida serves on the board of the Recuerda a Cesar Chavez Committee and the Dia de San Isidro Planning Committee. Welcome, Saida, and thank you so much for being here. You have the floor.
Great, thank you so much for inviting me today to share the work that we're doing here in New Mexico. I also want to recognize that today is Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, which traces its origins back to indigenous culture hundreds of years ago. And when I think about farming and growing food and planting seeds, this is knowledge that has been passed down from our ancestors. And so when I look at seeds, I know that they are here today with us, those seeds, because our ancestors saved them. Our ancestors knew how to cultivate plants, knew which seeds to save, and that's how we have these seeds today. So I just want to acknowledge for those on the call on this webinar who are celebrating Dia de los Muertos. It's a beautiful holiday to be talking about indigenous roots. I have some slides I'll be showing today. And as Susan just explained our mission, we've been working in New Mexico for a little over 40 years, and it is on food systems work with a particular focus on small-scale farmers. And we're looking at how to support the producers so that we can have healthy food in our community. And there's an emphasis on the local schools because we know that most of the children in the school systems who eat school lunch are low-income children who are on the free and reduced lunch program. And we want to make sure that the food we're growing is staying within our communities and not just going to places where people can afford them, like high-end restaurants. So we want to make sure it's also reaching our own children. I'll be explaining how we implement this mission of creating economic viability. And we do that in multiple ways, the training of farmers, providing technical assistance, and some of our policy work. But the end goal is always about protecting the land and water rights for traditional cultural practices and accompanying traditional people. Let me go back. So I was asked to share our theory of change. So on this slide, you'll see the image there is of our chiles. If you've ever been to New Mexico, you know that chiles are an important part of our cuisine. People will be asked red or green when they order food at a restaurant, referring to if you want red or green chili with your food. So this is a crop that is very sacred to people too, the chile. Our theory of change, the idea is that if local community members and new farmers are accompanied in traditional and modern agricultural practices, and if natural resource policy allows small farmers greater access to New Mexico's food distribution system, then the economic and social base of communities most vulnerable to land loss and economic dislocation will be strengthened because they'll be able to keep their land and water in sustainable production for the cultural and economic benefit of the entire local community. So I wanted to share that with you and kind of break that down in my presentation. So first we have to recognize that our food system is not an equal food system. And particularly in New Mexico, and I'm sure this is true across our nation, food systems that existed were dismantled as a result of colonization, as part of colonization and racism. And that's what's caused the inequities that we see today. And because of that, our system is not a natural system, it's not sustainable, and it's not appropriate in New Mexico. And so when we look at how we want to support producers, we look at accompanying traditional ways of life because we don't want to contribute to this long waves of colonization through gentrification around land issues or water issues or subtle racism that exists in the food system. So that's important to us to always keep in mind when we talk about food systems work. Food hub has been a word that I hear a lot of people saying the last few years. And when I talk to the people that we accompany in our work, traditional land-based people, they kind of laugh at that word because it was not a term, food hub was not a term that had been used before. But what we mean by food hub is how people would describe a way of life that it has been around for a long time. And the last few generations, it's been, we've seen more dismantling of that. But food hubs existed in New Mexico. People bartered and traded. Different geographic areas of our state grew particular types of crops and then moved it to other parts where other crops were grown. And so these were food hubs that had always existed. And again, I appreciate the recognition that we're not talking about new systems, that was one of the findings in the report. And indigenous people always remind me of that what we're doing is not new, that we are reclaiming, we're uplifting practices that have been resilient and that continue on. These are not new things. And organic is not new. It's the pesticides and the conventional methods that are new. Organic has been the way it's been here for thousands of years. I'm going to go to the next slide. So one of the methods that we use is a farmer-to-farmer training program. And this is a hands-on training program that we provide on site at farms. And it's a very comprehensive program. We have 15 areas of training so that people learn everything from crop selection, planting, harvesting techniques, post-harvest handling and food safety, market access, loan programs, resources, and season extension. And they're taught by farmers to other farmers. This is a picture here of farmers. It's a peer-to-peer learning. There is an experienced farmer teaching beginner farmers in the image here. And they're inside a passive solar cold frame. Part of our training program is teaching people some new technologies like passive solar for season extension to grow in the winter. In our training program, people are paid a stipend because we know that it would be difficult to work full-time and be in the training program. And so this isn't a program for people who can just afford to not work for a year, because it is a full year program. So we do support people with a stipend so they can really commit to a year of 4 seasons of growing. And we do build infrastructure as part of the training program. So some of our training programs take place at the farm trainees' own land, and sometimes they're at a centralized site. And we do build infrastructure at those farm sites, like the cold frames that I mentioned, irrigation systems, wash stations, cold storage units. And the goal is that we want people to graduate with the knowledge and with the tools and hopefully a working farm by the time they're finished with the program. Another part of our work, reflecting on traditional ways, is talking about collaborative marketing and creating farmer networks and farmer cooperatives. So we don't want people to graduate from our training program only to compete against each other in the marketplace, which can bring down pricing and make it more difficult for people to be economically sustainable. So we teach people how to aggregate their produce for markets, especially institutional markets and wholesale buyers. We don't find that aggregation works very well for small markets like a farmer's market stand, but it does work well for the really large markets where it makes a lot of sense for small farmers to work together to have enough quantity and to have consistency in their production for these larger markets. So in that vein, we have incubated 3 farmer cooperatives. The Agricultura Network was started, incubated by AFSC in 2009 in Albuquerque. And then La Cosecha del Norte, a growing cooperative, was started in 2012 by AFSC in northern New Mexico. We incubated there. And then in southern New Mexico, we incubated the Sol y Tierra Growers Cooperative. And when I say incubation, what I mean is that we believe that people do need support in the beginning in creating a cooperative. It might be technical support on how to actually create bylaws. It's also giving support like funding a broker that can broker the food, funding delivery, the driving of the food, distributing it, helping with bookkeeping, helping with tax accounting. So we do that for a number of years until the co-op has put enough of the percentage of their sales back into the co-op to have sort of a nest egg, and then can be spun off of AFSC and be on its own and have the capacity and the funding to do it and to be a thriving cooperative. Some of the accomplishments that I wanted to share, because we do have independent evaluators who track data on the work that we're doing. And in this image, this is our garlic harvest. So we actually have a festival at one of our farms, and it's a contest. People come out at 7 o'clock in the morning on a hot July day, and they come into teams and harvest garlic to see who can harvest the most garlic. And we even have some local musicians who serenade them while they harvest garlic. And we've had some garlic cooking contests where people bring recipes so people can taste different ways that garlic can be used. I have to say the most unusual recipe was garlic ice cream, which tasted terrible, and my daughter still talks about it. But we talk about the health benefits of garlic, and people leave with garlic. But it's part of our way of harvesting as a community, and this idea of a collective, cooperative tradition. Some of the things that we've done, we have trained 57 new farmers. These were folks who went through our year-long program and graduated and are farming now. And in addition, there's another 268 small organic farmers that we've provided technical assistance. And technical assistance is usually pretty deep assistance. It can be helping them to build a cold frame or a wash station or an irrigation system. It could be helping them open up new markets, joining a cooperative. So we try to give very substantial technical assistance. We've built 22 new farms in New Mexico, incubated the 3 farmer cooperatives. We've built 31 passive solar cold frames. And when we build these cold frames, we teach farmers how to build them. So they're doing it with us so that that's a skill that they have that they can then share with others, is that they know how to build the cold frame as well as use them. And we've worked on policy to locally so that our state legislature would provide local funds to our local schools to buy from local farmers. And then after passing that bill, they asked us to distribute the funds and identify which schools and which farmers are matched. So we've been doing that for the last 3 years. And we also organize annual farmer gatherings so that we can build out a cooperative statewide farmer network, which makes a lot of sense for folks because we have a wide variety of climates in New Mexico from the north to the south. And there are things that can be grown in southern New Mexico in November, like tomatoes, that you can't grow in northern New Mexico in November. But everybody wants tomatoes around the year, so if we can cooperate across the state, we can make sure that we're reaching all of those markets. In the same vein, sometimes it's too hot in southern New Mexico to grow salad, but you can grow salad in northern New Mexico in the summer, so we can move salad down to the south. So if we can work together, everybody can win, everyone can reach those markets if they're working cooperatively. So we've been having those annual farmer gatherings to help people build relationships with each other, to feel a sense of trust and wanting to work together and cooperate in a network. And all of our work, that's our methodology, is the relationship building and the trust building. One of the things about our work is that we only go where we are invited. And it's a real honor to be invited into some of the tribes in New Mexico. There are 23 tribes in New Mexico. 19 are called pueblos. And the history of pueblos is the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, which every child in New Mexico has learned that history, but I think outside of New Mexico, people haven't heard of it. But it's the only indigenous uprising in North America where the indigenous people won. And that was their fight against the Spanish conquistadors. So the 19 pueblos in New Mexico, the people are on their original land and have their land and water rights. They don't have all of their original land, but they're not on reservations. They're on their own land. And that's important in thinking about the work that we do accompanying people and being invited into their culture, into their sovereign land, and when they ask for support. So some of our vision for the future of the work is that we would love to see small-scale, sustainable farms are supported with resources and with good policy, and that land-based people are not displaced from their land, and that traditional knowledge and values are reaffirmed. One thing that we've seen is that traditional knowledge around farming and around water issues is very important, but has often been dismissed. And more lately, we've seen science and academia and research prove some of these ancestral teachings. And then people believe it once that's been proven by science or proven by Western academy. And we would like to see traditional knowledge and values affirmed without that. An example I can give is one of the methods we teach in our farmer training program is planting by the lunar cycle. And we had a person in our training program who really didn't believe that crop yield would be different if she planted with the lunar cycle, which is traditional indigenous knowledge. So the first year of farming after our program, she did not follow the lunar cycle. The second year, she tried it, and her crop yield was so much stronger following the lunar cycle that she was a believer and now tells people, well, there's something to this. So we would like to see people really affirm that traditional knowledge. In New Mexico, we have a water system called acequia, and it's a traditional water system that is democratically controlled. And there's often a fight in a place like New Mexico where water is the most precious resource. We're a desert, and so we cannot grow food without water. Land is useless without water. And there's a lot of competing interests for water, especially when it comes to expanding development, seeing water as a commodity. And we want to go to the, keep the traditional value of water as a public good, water as something everyone needs, and an indigenous understanding of water rather than a Western understanding of water. So our vision is to keep the acequias thriving and keep the water rights in the communities and not have that sold off. Also, our vision is that all New Mexicans have access to healthy food and dignity in their work. And so when we think about where the food goes that we grow, we want to make sure it's reaching all New Mexicans. And again, not just where people can afford it, like a restaurant that maybe our farmers couldn't even afford to go into, but are buying it because it's local food. So we try to think of ways to make sure that the food is accessible to everyone. And the dignity in work, the belief that people who grow the food should be respected, and we don't want to see exploitation of farmers or farm workers in this food system. And we know that there are colonial and racist policies and systems that dominate our food system, and we want to dismantle that. I'm going to go here to the next slide. That's a picture of our corn. So here's some of our best practices and some lessons that we've learned in doing this work. Originally, our farmer training program was only for beginner farmers, and we found over time that we needed to offer a second model for people that weren't beginners, but were struggling to keep their farm afloat, or struggling to keep it economically viable. Sometimes they needed training on crop selection or crop sequencing, or needed market access, or there was infrastructure that they were lacking in order to really make a living farming. So we expanded our training program from that feedback so that we could also provide what we call like a training 2.0 for people who are not beginners. Another important thing that we found is we really have to change the discourse in the way that people talk about food systems that reflect an understanding of the history in New Mexico, of how we have the food systems we have today. Why are there people who are no longer farming? Who has ownership of land and water rights? Who is farming and who is not? And that's really important when there are new ideas of how to revitalize food systems, that people are aware first of the history so they don't inadvertently replicate colonizing behaviors or racist systems. We also feel it's very important that a best practice is that land-based people are the decision makers and the leaders in the food system work, not an afterthought. We're happy to see so many people now talking about racial equity and recognizing the role of land-based people, but sometimes it's an afterthought where people are maybe written into a grant or put in a consulting role, but they're not there from the beginning as a decision maker and as a leader. So a best practice for us is to always have that as the center. We would love to see subsidies shift in our food production from large agricultural and in exporting our agriculture to subsidizing small-scale food systems, small-scale farmers. That would really help with the affordability of food, why sometimes our junk food is much cheaper than local, organic, healthy food. And part of that is the system of subsidies, so we would like to see that changed. And we also want to stop the race to the bottom in pricing. And that's partly why we looked at and worked on that state legislative policy where schools could be given enough funds to pay a fair price for the food, and those funds were only to be used on the local farms. And that was one way to stop that race to the bottom pricing. And the other important lesson that we learned and had always been encouraged was to start small, and we prefer to pilot our programs and demonstrate them and then expand. We prefer to only share what we know has worked, and to really listen to the traditional knowledge and values and make sure that we keep that with us. And so part of that is the idea of being small before expanding. And lastly, we have resources that we can offer at AFSC. They're on our website, and we've created a Building a Community Garden School curriculum. This was written by farmers and teachers, and there are stories from New Mexico, there are stories from the Red Wolf Clan, there are stories about the Tres Hermanas, the Three Sisters Companion Planting, which is indigenous knowledge. And so it's a great community garden curriculum that teachers can use, and it meets our state standards in New Mexico, and that's available online. We also have a farmer training manual, Farming for a Sustainable Community, and we have a food safety manual for small-scale farmers who don't fit with the GAP and FSMA, but still have to follow food safety standards. And there's a lot of great resources within that manual. And they're all free on our website, and the website's there at afsc.org/New Mexico. Everything has been translated into Spanish, except for the garden curriculum, which is currently being translated. And I would share, too, that our Facebook page tends to be more active than our web page, so you can always check out what we're doing and what we're working on our Facebook page. And it's been a real honor to do this work in New Mexico. I'm very appreciative of the land-based and indigenous people who invite us to accompany them, and I'm glad to be able to share it today, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Saida. There's really excellent resources available there on your website, so thanks for providing that link. And just remember, everybody on here, the slides are available. You'll be able to follow up with those post-webinar. And we have one quick question here from Madison to Saida. Do you have any strategic planning templates for developing a garden or farm that y'all have developed through your work there with AFSC in New Mexico?
Thanks for the question, Madison. In terms of a strategic plan, we have an internal strategic plan that has to do with our own objectives and goals in terms of farmer training, infrastructure, accompaniment, But we do also have templates for business plans and farm plans. And so I'm not sure if you mean more of a plan for how someone would make a farm plan in terms of crop selection and crop sequencing, and then a business plan in terms of their market. If so, feel free to email me. I think our strategic plan is more specific to the work we do as a nonprofit. And so I could see about if that's useful to you too. I think at the end of today, my email address will be on one of the screens.
Great, thank you, Saida. I definitely want to try and make it there next year for that garlic harvest. It sounds like a ton of fun. So next up, we're going to head out to Northern California to hear from Lisa Hillman and Jennifer Sauerwein from the Klamath Basin Tribal Food Security Project. The Klamath Basin Tribal Food Security Project aims to enhance tribal health and food security in the Klamath Basin of Northern California by building a sustainable regional food system. Through collaborative and participatory approaches, the University of California, Berkeley and University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources Division, together with the Karuk, Yurok, and Klamath tribes and UC Cooperative Extension and the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, has worked to co-develop research, education, and hands-on workshops and training programs to evaluate the barriers and develop solutions to achieve a healthy food system. Over the past 5 years, the project has achieved countless outcomes related to empowering youth, developing leadership, strengthening institutional capacity, increasing knowledge and awareness, building skills, and transforming the condition of food security among tribal populations in the Klamath. And joining us today to share their work is Jennifer Sauerwein and Lisa Hillman. Jennifer is an Assistant Cooperative Extension Specialist in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management at UC Berkeley. Her work engages diverse stakeholders across the spectrum of the food system to build equitable, economically viable, and culturally relevant food systems that contribute to healthy communities, ecologic diversity, and sustainable livelihoods. For the past 5 years, she has led the collaborative and participatory research, education, and outreach program with the Karuk, Yurok, and Klamath tribes to enhance tribal health, food security, and food sovereignty. And Karuk tribal member Lisa Hillman has over 30 years experience working with schools, community colleges, and universities on curriculum development, program management, and serving as a lecturer. Mother of 6, Lisa is an advocate for the preservation and perpetuation of cultural heritage and the advancement of both tribal and non-tribal youth. Currently, Lisa is the program manager for the Pikyav Field Institute, a holistic environmental education program that incorporates traditional as well as Western knowledge. She and Jennifer work closely together in the Klamath Basin Tribal Food Security Project. Welcome, Jennifer and Lisa. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you so much, Susan, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this webinar. I and my colleague, Lisa Hillman from the Karuk tribe, are really happy to share with you some of the lessons that we've learned from our 5-year collaboration that is aimed at enhancing tribal food sovereignty among the Karuk, Klamath, and Yurok tribes in the Klamath River Basin. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the funder of this project, the USDA NIFA AFRI Food Security Program, and thank you. And we've also introduced the other partners on the tribe, the Yurok tribe, the Klamath tribes, together with Cooperative Extension and the local nonprofit, the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council. What's been exciting about this project is just the collaborative efforts that we've all worked on together. And I'm going to particularly focus on some of the benefits and values and opportunities for these kinds of collaborations. So I'm going to start off by just giving a quick overview of the project, our approach, and some reflections on the activities we've been involved with, and then Lisa will share her insight on key project activities and lessons learned from the Karuk tribe specifically. So the Klamath River Basin is our geographic scope of the project, as you can see here. And our approach was really to move beyond these kind of contemporary political boundaries that are bound at the state or county levels to really look at this biocultural region as a whole, in which the people and resources or relationships really spanned across these contemporary boundaries. The Klamath River, as you can see here, originates in southern Oregon around Crater Lake, which is home of the Klamath tribes, and then it flows down, joining the Trinity, extending through Siskiyou and Humboldt counties first, which is the home of the Karuk tribe, and then eventually flows and joins the Trinity River and then pours out into the Pacific Ocean near the town of Klamath, which is the home of the Yurok tribe. just wanted to show a picture here of the Klamath River. It's such a beautiful region. This is a particular photo from the mid-Klamath area where the Karuk tribe, where Lisa's from. So just want to share that so you can have a sense of the territory in the region. So just to provide a little context for our project, what was the background and what was the situation we were trying to change, if we want to use the language of the logic model? Historically, the Klamath Basin, had an abundance of cultural foods, just rich in fish and acorns, elk and deer. And but nowadays, according to the USDA, it's considered a food desert. Much of the food that's grown locally here is actually shipped out to the coast, to some of those high-end farmers markets, as mentioned earlier. We've seen dramatic changes to the forests and fisheries associated with settler colonialism, as Saida had pointed out, including the installation of dams, as we see here on the image on the left, and mining, logging, fire suppression, as demonstrated here by Smokey the Bear. All of these activities have led to dramatic degradation of the habitat and in which a lot of the cultural foods are available. As a result, we've had a reduction of availability of cultural foods, and forced cultural assimilation has also played an important role in disrupting the traditional food system, impacting not only the physical, but also the cultural and the spiritual health of the communities here in the region. As a result, we're seeing really high rates of diet-related diseases. We did some research and found 84% of all the households had someone in their family with a diet-related disease. And tribes in the region are also some of the poorest and most food insecure, with poverty rates of upwards of 43% and more than 50% experiencing very low food security. We also see really high rates of unemployment and youth with very limited opportunities for jobs and other venues. And just one other kind of contextual situation is that as UC researchers, we also wanted to recognize and acknowledge a lot of the historical injustices that have played out between academic institutions and California tribes in recent history. And, look, we really explored this project as an opportunity to move toward healing in some small steps. I do want to note that in spite of these challenges, tribes in the region are incredibly resilient. Because of the relative remoteness out in the West Coast, they've retained much of the wisdom and cultural practices associated with food gathering, as well as traditional land management, including, for example, prescribed burning that has sustained their populations and spiritual connection to the world around them for thousands of years. So the goal of this project is not only to increase access to and consumption of fresh, healthy, and culturally relevant and affordable foods, but also to support tribal goals to revitalize their overall eco-cultural system, with a particular focus on increasing tribal sovereignty, not only over their lands and their cultural resources, including foods and fibers, but also their cultural knowledge and heritage. By having an explicit focus on Native food systems, this project really sheds light on the specific concerns that are unique to the Native community, which complements a number of existing county-level food security assessments that oftentimes have limited tribal voices. So what did we do? Well, when the RFP was announced, I had developed some relationships with the Karuk tribe and realized that this was a really great opportunity for us to go for. So it took over a year to develop the project goals and objectives and develop additional partnerships with the Klamath and the Yurok tribes. It took time to identify our priorities, and we eventually settled on 43 research, education, and outreach objectives, which in retrospect was quite a number for us to carve off, and we can discuss that more in the question and answers if you'd like. So the research largely focused on two components. First was evaluating laws and policies that both inhibit and enable hunting, fishing, and gathering within the region. And the second really looked at adapting the USDA Food Security Toolkit to evaluate both food insecurity among the tribal populations, but then also exploring this idea of Native foods insecurity, so the inability to access their customary and traditional foods. We had a really big emphasis on regional capacity building, again, identified by our tribal partners, focusing on youth development, a number of different activities focused on experiential learning through camps, workshops, and classes, focus on professional development, as well as creating a number of different regional repositories of information, including a library you'll hear about later. And then the project also helped to lay the foundation for the establishment of this tribal-led Field Research Institute, which is really an exciting initiative that Lisa will share with you. And then the other activities really focused on, again, community-led solutions to food insecurity, emphasizing transformations in the food system through farm fish to school, greenhouse and community garden production, as well as a number of activities focused on enhancing the productivity and exchange of native foods. So we'd like to take a moment just to share out some of our guiding principles that we really believe contributed to the success of our project. To begin with, it was really fundamentally important to consider that the university is not the sole locus of knowledge production. We very intentionally invited each of the tribal partners to serve as a co-principal investigator on the grant, with an emphasis of really focusing on collaborative research and participatory research, as well as the extension programming. As Saida mentioned, oftentimes people include the communities as an afterthought, but this was really intentional from the beginning, where we allocated the majority of the funding from our project to the 3 tribes, recognizing based on their input that they really would like to be able to build up their own internal capacity, providing opportunities for jobs and staffing. We also really are committed to this idea that research, shouldn't be just done for research's sake, but that it really has an applied focus that is participatory and also is policy relevant. And partnering with the university and the tribal communities, we were able to leverage both the benefits of Western science and together with traditional ecological knowledge to have a lot of wonderful programs. Important to our work was really ensuring that all of the work really is benefiting the tribes, and we had an important element of tribal oversight to ensure that was in place. Communication is really critical when you have large partnerships like this, particularly given our histories, and so we engaged in frequent check-ins, monthly conference calls, and also had annual face-to-face meetings every year. It's really important as well at the get-go to clearly define the roles in the collaborative project to make sure who was responsible for what. Again, listening is really vital in these kinds of partnerships, and practicing transparency as well as patience. And most importantly, really respecting cultural knowledge and tribal sovereignty. So because this has been a 5-year project and we have a lot of different partners, we have so much to share, but just to give you a sense, in year 5 alone, we held 424 educational events with nearly 7,000 participants across the entire region. And the activities aim to teach people how to grow, process, cook, and consume locally grown and gathered foods. So we're going to show you a few slides just illustrating some of the highlights, including the value of partnerships. So the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, the nonprofit partner, together with the Yurok and the Karuk tribes, collaborated on developing several community and school-based gardens. The emphasis was particularly on youth education and empowerment, as well as hosting a number of large family workshops. So this idea that we bring together the youth and the elders together for shared learning. We found that the community and school gardens that had champions were really some of the most successful. On a larger scale, the Yurok tribe had more of a community farm in which they partnered with the tribal TANF to grow and distribute over 300 quart-size canned products to elders. A lot of the food went to the culture committee and community gatherings, and they really found it very important to prioritize distributing food to the elders. The Klamath tribes collaborated in a really interesting project with the Oregon Institute of Technology to have a greenhouse construction competition. So the students built 4 different greenhouses, and they're still up and going and growing and distributing over 600 pounds of produce today. The food's distributed to elders and tribal families and also sold at the farmers market. And what's exciting about the Klamath Tribal Project is that they leveraged this grant to secure additional funds to build a community food security kitchen for ongoing nutrition education classes into the future. Another example of a really great partnership was between the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council and the Karuk tribe, in which they were able to assess a number of old and sometimes abandoned heritage orchards with a focus on historical tribal allotments that were accessible to the local communities. So in addition to surveying the condition and revitalizing the orchards, they also provided workshops to community members in how to prune and graft, transplant and care for the new trees, as well as a number of different harvesting and processing activities. They created a really nice toolkit, guidebook that if you're interested in learning more about it can be found on the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council's Foodshed page. Both the Yurok and the Karuk tribe identified the interest or the desire to hire a food crew. And the Yurok food crew, they followed the seasons and gathered traditional foods, as you can see here, and distributed them to elders. Again, prioritizing the focus on ensuring that the elders are taken care of first. The Mid-Klamath Watershed Council Foodshed program led a series of really just wildly popular community foodshed classes with really high rates of participation. You can see here everything ranging from butchering and canning, baking, and apple pressing. And the focus was really on having these being hands-on and experiential learning activities. This idea of learning by doing. Each year, the group would evaluate the different classes, and on the evaluation, they would also listen to the community to find out what additional projects or classes they might like to have. So they just recently held a chicken tractor workshop where they learned how to build chicken tractors. And something that was important in these community foodshed classes is the value of having a dedicated outreach coordinator, someone who could, do dedicated outreach to recruit tribal participants and even drive them to the events if necessary, because sometimes people don't have cars and sometimes conventional modes of communication like email or Facebook may not reach all of the community members. We also developed a number of online resources. The Mid-Klamath Watershed Council developed a number of regionally appropriate agricultural bulletins, as well as a seasonal calendar that's appropriate for that particular region. So it's been a wonderful tool and resource that the community is going to be able to continue to use and leverage as they go into the future. And here's, you can see the link down below if you're interested in following up. And finally, I'm just going to share out a little bit about our tribal herbaria. It's a really wonderful example of this value of integrating Western science with traditional ecological knowledge. So with both the Karuk and the Yurok tribes, we established tribal herbaria, which are essentially a collection of culturally important plants that are dried. So we collect a segment of it, we dry them, press them, and then mount them on paper, and then they're stored in a kind of library. It's like a native plant library that can be used as an educational tool for learning about native foods. It also can be used as a research tool into the future to show potentially the impact of climate change on the distribution of native food plants. So to date, we've collected more than 200 plants, and they're pressed and currently being used. Just one thing to note on this is around this idea of capacity building. So rather than bringing in a scientific botanist to collect the plants and press them, we provided training to a tribal member, Ben Saxon here, who has taken the lead and is now curating the herbarium and also is leading the majority of the youth educational programs. So with that, I would like to pass it over to Lisa now.
So Ayuki Akubura, this is Lisa Hillman, and I'm saying hello and thank you so much, Jennifer. On this portion of the presentation, I'd like to speak to the Karuk tribe's objectives, all of which focus on reclaiming our cultural heritage where food security plays the central role. Naturally, so we have also clear focus on so traditional ecological knowledge, and trying to move this forward here. Thank you. So traditional ecological knowledge paired with Western science. So in Objective 16, we organize these to meet the bounty of the seasons. So of course in the fall we focus on our main staples, tan oak, acorn, and salmon. Winter is a time for storytelling, which has very much to do with teaching youth how to be responsible for and work with the resources given to us. When we the lessons really learned through this one is that that weekend activities actually were complicated. So they were conflicting with sports events and family times, and actually it was really hard to get kids there. So we decided to change our tactic on this one to offer day camps to the schools, and ended up with about tenfold impact. So teachers were absolutely thrilled with the opportunity, and having the school buses being able to bring in a couple of class loads at a time into the camps out in the field allowed us to be able to offer these field-based events to all of the children in our area, except for those who were skipping school. No. So here with this Objective 17, so I'm an educator myself, and perhaps I'm partial in the belief that this objective may be the most important and lasting impact we've made. Lessons learned, so curriculum development is highly time-consuming, but it is worth it. Our goal was to create academically challenging and culturally relevant lessons that meet our California State Common Core standards. That was in English language arts, and we're just now moving these into also embracing the history and science as well as math standards on different ones. So for me, teaching vocabulary, reading increasingly challenging texts, developing critical thinking skills, all of these can be done using content that Native students can identify with and embrace. And at the same time, we can really do the best we can to move back to a system, a food system that functions, and so tribal people back to being able to do those things that we haven't been able to do for over 100 years. So I think I'm already about out of time, and so I'm just so super sorry about this. I just want to tell you, these, so with the Objective 24, we've, we're trying to do intergenerational, training, working with parents of the kids that were at the seasonal youth camps, and were doing the curriculum at school with their teachers. So this is the only objective that I haven't been able to secure further funding for. Besides this, we've been able to leverage the successes of this project with our AFRI partners to actually sustain the project for the next several years. So this is one of our objectives that I haven't spoken to, or we just, Jennifer just barely briefly touched on, the SIPNUC Digital Library. So this was initially just a digital repository for the information that, the new information that we were producing, and also some of the historic and contemporary information about, food, our food system in the mid and upper and lower Klamath Basin. And actually what we've learned here is that we really needed to make a system that would deal with copyright issues that we hadn't even thought about before, or data sovereignty, protection of traditional knowledge, and other forms of cultural heritage knowledge. So we ended up having to develop a number of policies, guidelines, and collaborative agreements, and this leads us to our project's impacts. Jennifer?
Great, thank you, Lisa. So we're beginning to see some of the outcomes of our efforts that we're really excited to share out. As you can see here, it's kind of modeled off of the logic model again. So we've seen an incredible increase in knowledge. 76% of the respondents have said they've learned something new. People have tried their skills at home. They feel that their community is becoming more food secure. And 81% said the programs have changed the community in other positive ways. So we're really excited about this, and we're happy to talk more about our evaluation strategy later. So I just want to take a moment to also acknowledge all of our other partners on this project. And this picture doesn't even show everyone, but it's just been such an honor to work with Lisa and with our other tribal colleagues and other organizations to really work and help move this effort forward. We've touched on a lot of lessons learned already, and I just wanted to include this slide that we're happy to discuss further, just the importance of setting realistic goals, the importance of really creating an evaluation strategy right up front, especially in these multi-partner collaborations, the importance of really dedicating sufficient resources, not just only to implement the program, but then also to achieve outreach, and also investment of time for data tracking and evaluation, and ongoing fundraising if you're wanting to secure funds to continue work into the future. And then we have a slide here you can refer back to as well in terms of useful tools and resources. So again, thank you all so much for listening.
Wow, thank you, Lisa and Jennifer. It is like really incredible, the breadth and depth of what you all are doing out there in Klamath. So thank you so much for sharing the work of this collaborative. And we have some time here this afternoon to have some question and answer. So I'm curious, Jeff, if we have any specific questions for the Klamath Tribal Food Security Project before we move into general questions.
Andrea just sent in a question. She asks, what ways has the community changed in the Klamath Basin?
I guess that's going to be my question. So being in the Klamath, so I live in Orleans. That's really in the very heart of the Klamath Basin. So and I'm I live in Karuk territory. That's south of Klamath tribe. So just in our area, we're very rural, very remote. My hometown is under 600 people, and it's really racially diverse in that we have so big faction of tribal people. So it's over 70 to 90% of our students have at least some descendancy in them, but we also then have another group of it's really hard for me to be able to say, because it's different kinds of agriculturalists, organic farmers, but a lot of people that have tried to do some alternative living. So it's actually been a little bit contentious. It has always been for since Euro-American invasion, we always say here, so in the tribe, but it's but I have to say this project really made huge advancements as far as understanding and working working more together. I see a lot of tribal families, many more tribal families out now, so in the field gathering and doing things like that. I hear from parents saying, wow, my kid came home from so your lesson today and said, wow, we got to get out there, and so it won't stop bugging me about it. So I see a real huge change. A lot of people feeling very comfortable talking about food security, so familiar with the word and understanding the concepts and out doing things to promote those things, as well as the other portion of it, just embracing and feeling good about being tribal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. This is Jennifer. I'll just add that, currently we're just starting the evaluation program, where we've been not only sending out, forms for people to fill out, but after each of the workshops, people would fill out evaluations as well. And we find that a lot of people, are now engaged in different kinds of food production or processing. Lots of people are canning. A lot more people are putting in gardens, and so this idea of sort of enhancing subsistence food is a real value of outcome of the project. Many of the tribal folks, particularly in the mid-Klamath region, it can be upwards of a 2-hour drive to the nearest grocery store. So being able to grow and process and store your own foods has been really, really important. We also got feedback that people feel more confident to do these kinds of things, to bake, to cook. One of the nice modes of peer learning that we've found is through the Mid-Klamath the Foodshed Facebook page. So after a number of the classes that were held, you could see people posting, what they had done, if they'd canned their tomatoes, or if they'd baked their breads, or if they'd butchered something. There's a lot of seed exchanges going on via this Mid-Klamath Foodshed Facebook page. So, both increased confidence, increased, ability to produce and store and preserve their own foods, and then resulting in increased consumption of healthy, locally procured food.
That's wonderful. It's working. Saida, do you want to address how you've seen your region's culture change?
Yes, I would say that I think the work that we
I think we may have some bandwidth issues.
Am I there?
Oh, there you are. Yeah.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I would say that in the work that we're doing accompanying land-based people, that we see efforts amplified. It's not that they were ever stopped. It's that people needed support and help with capacity to do it. So, for example, people have been growing food in the tribes. Land-based people have always done that and saved seeds and kept those practices. But they've also been discouraged over time being able to keep up in a very competitive market where they don't have subsidies, where the price points aren't equal. And so having support and accompaniment in cooperative work, in getting monies to schools so they can get a fair price for their food, these are important ways that we can amplify what they're doing. So I've seen that happening as we see good policy put in place or resources directed towards folks. It helps them to expand production and to get their food into more places.
Oh, I mean, y'all are doing such incredible work in these communities, and we've heard a lot about this. Again, the depth of your engagement in communities, and I'm certain that along these journeys that you have run into some challenges along the way. So I'm kind of curious to hear what those primary challenges and pain points that you face as organizations and how you're addressing them. And maybe Saida, you could start us off.
Sure. Some of our challenges are, there's always a lot of challenges. Let me think of where to start. I don't know if I'd use the word challenge, but one thing that we're aware of in working in tribal community is showing respect for the way that people want stories told. For example, here there is laws in our pueblos that you cannot take photographs, you can't videotape, sketch, draw, or paint what it looks like at the pueblos. And so sometimes we're a nonprofit, we get funding to do this work, and people want documentation of what we've done. And so being aware of what documentation is comfortable and respectful for the tribal and indigenous people that we are accompanying. And so that's an important thing to always keep in mind, then communicate and translate that back to a funder that is not an indigenous funder in explaining how we talk about the work or how we document the work. I think too that another challenge in being a nonprofit that comes from a Western framework is understanding time and the amount of time it takes to do things with depth and with quality, and the time people need to build trust, to be clear in what expectations are and clear in our commitments. And that doesn't always fit timeframes for a fiscal year or for strategic planning. And so it's an interesting intersection of Western, maybe nonprofit culture, and then working with indigenous culture. And again, we want to center things with indigenous people and land-based people. So we have to adapt that framework in the nonprofit world. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind. There's always challenges around funding and communication, and I think those things are actually a little easier, and the most important thing is, being culturally competent and being respectful in doing this work so that it's truly authentic work.
Great, thank you. Lisa and Jennifer, do y'all want to share any of the kind of primary challenges that you faced over these past 5 years of implementing this project?
Sure. So this is Lisa, and I'm going to say, as a tribal person, we had right from the very beginning, also a lot of trepidation working with, so not only with other tribes on, so being really very careful about not so treading on their territory or taking some of their resources, but also, in working with the academic and non-tribal world, you've always got that kind of problem which we've had, so that cultural appropriation or expatriation of tribal knowledge, and so we were all very, very wary and careful. So they proved to be, challenging. So they caused tensions and pain points, but we were able to work through them simply for the fact that, so as Jennifer pointed out, this grant and this project really focused and centered, collaborative, respectful collaboration from the beginning. And we worked through so many different, difficult situations. But, so in doing all this, we ended up, designing a really complicated system for protecting intellectual property. And it's just due to the fact that our policies didn't really cover everything that we wanted them to do. And this seemed to be the case with every new collaborative project requiring new documents to be developed. And so we're trying to consolidate those and simplify those. The other challenges that we have, with the Karuk tribe, we just simply don't have the human resources, for example, tribal capacity to respond to requests and needs for tribal oversight, consultation, policy, research review. So we often have people saying, oh, we're really, we want to work with you, so tribal people, so can you come down to this meeting down here, 3 hours away one way, and so spend all day at this meeting? No. So, and sometimes I'm thinking, well, who am I going to call for help? Who do we go for help and support? Let's say Ghostbusters, okay?
Good timing there with Halloween having just happened. Jennifer, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, that's awesome, Lisa. Yeah, I don't have too much to add, but I just would like to kind of echo something that Saida mentioned about these asymmetries that sometimes exist between what funders are looking for and what communities are focused on. And then also coming from an academic institution, the asymmetries between, what the academics are looking for versus, the goals and the expected outcomes for the community members. So I think those are some challenges that particularly we focused on in the beginning, in addition to creating these kind of tribal protocol with the Karuk tribe to make sure that we're following a proper process when we move toward publication, so that we not only co-created the research, but we also analyzed the data together, and then we're co-authoring, and we're ensuring that the Cultural Resources Advisory Board is reviewing it and providing authorization for publication, as well as tribal council. So this speaks to this question of time, right? So where it takes just longer time to ensure that we're really following and respecting the tribal protocols. The other element too with respect to these asymmetries is just, what are the data that our funders are looking for, and how do we ensure that everybody, is able to not only, know what those metrics are, but then also taking the time and having the resources to be able to track those, and then also report out. So we did spend quite a lot of time in the first couple years really just revisiting the logic model, revisiting, all of these different metrics, and sharing out templates that folks can fill out. And I just also want to say that how valuable it has been that this was a 5-year grant, because it takes time to build these, not only these kinds of relationships, but then also, build the programs and allow them to really deepen and then manifest in ways. So it's just, again, that idea and that idea of time is really, really important.
Mm-hmm. Well, and speaking of, all the different objectives and things to keep track of, I know you guys have developed a pretty good system for that. And so I'm curious, if we could forward in these slides. Lisa, do you want to walk us through this?
Yeah, and I'm sorry that these are so, they look so tiny. So for me, I can barely see them, which is belies my age, perhaps. But here it is. I just wanted to show you some of the, this is a sort of a, an Excel spreadsheet. I have all of the objectives. We're dealing with multiple programs, so I've multiple grant funders, so I have a lot of different things going. But here we have them listed. So the number, the date, description. So the the people, the staff that are they're responsible for doing the reporting for any given event or activity, they just punch in all the information, and it'll compile all of this as we move from week to week. If we can move on to the next slide here, let's see there. So what happens is I have we have this naming convention. So where we have the year, so then the month, and then the date. So always at the beginning, then talking about the objective, and which is this SYC, for example, here is seasonal youth camp. So really then inputting just this information in here with all the tallies of hours, participants. So if we've got in-kind volunteers, it'll tally it all up. I kind of nerded out on this one, but so really the reason why I've got all these colors is just to help keep me keep track. And so if I've got them in this kind of convention, it's always going to be chronological, so it always will flip right on up. And then I can also then use the data filter, and tally up for any given objective all of the participants, leveraged activities, matching funds, so partners, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, I wanted to tell you how awesome this ended up being, because here I am nerding out and getting all these things together. But so I have this parallel. It has same naming convention. This is on my this is just a screenshot of my Dropbox, and you've got then so here it is in the end. I have a naming convention, so where it's okay, is it an assessment, is it a photo, is it a flyer, a sign-in sheet, a booklet, whatever, all those things, put it in there like that. So I know what I've got, and I can see if I've got something missing for any given date. And can track down okay, where did you put that agenda, etc. So what happens is, it was about 2 months ago, I was in Baltimore for a farm to school conference. Maybe it was only a month ago, and I get this message on my cell phone. Your two of your programs got audited, and they want to know where your sign-in sheets are. Can you tell us where you have them? Because we got to give them all the sign-in sheets. And so all I did is wrote back and said, no, here's the link to my Dropbox. All you need to do is write in the search box for the punch in sign-in, and they'll all come up. About 2 minutes later, I get this message back from a very strict colleague of mine. She said, "You are awesome." Mm-hmm. I tell you what, I screenshotted that one forever.
Well, this is Jeff. You guys are awesome. All of the panelists and these two initiatives are amazing. Thank you for sharing your time. It's so inspiring, and the breadth and depth of the work that you do is just amazing. So thank you all. I do have a few little announcements I'd like to do at the end of the webinar here. Please mark your calendars. The 4th Biennial National Good Food Network Conference is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yay, Saida! We are, the dates are up here, March 27th to 30th. We are planning for about 500 practitioners and supporters of good food to come. We will retain our conference's traditional focus on food hubs, but also are expanding the scope of the conference this year to include those businesses and organizations who work with and support these aggregators and distributors in their mission to scale up locally grown food. It really is a nuts and bolts conference, and it only comes around every 2 years. So registration is not yet available, although it's coming soon. We are now accepting proposals for sessions and workshops. If you visit wallacecenter.org/NGFN conference, the website is right up here. You can learn more about the conference, and there's a link on how to propose a session. There's also, if you're interested, a link for sponsoring our conference. The Wallace Center, through its National Good Food Network, as I mentioned, has been presenting these high-quality webinars now for years. And they are all recorded, this one too. They are archived on the NGFN website. If you go to ngfn.org/webinars, you'll go directly to the long list of webinars. They're also on the left-hand side, they are tagged by topic, organized by topic, so you can dive into the webinars of the topics that most interest you. As I mentioned, and so did Susan, this is the third of our 4 community food webinars. The fourth is on fourth and final, December 14th. And we also have, in the beginning of the year, a presentation of the National Food Hub Survey that we do in collaboration with Michigan State University, Center for Regional Food Systems. You can always go to ngfn.org/webinars, not only for seeing archives, but for signing up for the webinars. And let me encourage you to fill out our post-webinar survey, because right on there you can say, yes, yes, please sign me up for the next webinar or two. So you can find the Wallace Center again on the web. We have our websites on social media, and feel free to email us, contact@ngfn.org. This concludes the webinar. Again, thank you all for your time.